In this video, you will learn to stop worrying forever. Yes, I know it sounds too good to be true, but incorporating this one simple truth will give you an actionable tool that you can deploy whenever you find yourself spinning in this negative self-talk. And in case we don't know each other yet, I'm Oscar Lagrosen. I write a new article every day at thetotalliving.com about the lifestyle of total living, and also written and published 2 books, and will publish another book very soon, which you will get for free by signing up to the newsletter in the description. So if you're listening and watching this right now, you might have something top of mind that you worry about. It could be an upcoming presentation, it could be an upcoming performance, it could be a pitch, it could be a deadline, it could be your health, financial situation, other people, others' well-being, your job, world events, or simply worrying that you're not good enough. There are many causes of worry, as you might know. But let's take a moment to ask why. Why are you worrying? What's keeping you up at night? Maybe you do not want a certain outcome to happen. You do not want to fail and be ridiculed. You're afraid to jeopardize yourself, your reputation and the enterprise, and everyone will treat you badly after your incoherent stutter, shaky posture and blushed face. Maybe you're afraid of being abandoned, left out, ruined, injured and ultimately dead. Or most probably you are safe, but a loved one might face all the consequences previously mentioned. First of all, these outcomes are valid concerns. They all stems back to your evolutionary brain wiring. I mean, being cast out from the crowd meant death in the dawn of civilization. And obviously we survived as a species because we avoid death and dangerous places and people. So no wonder why the alarm signals are going off in your head at 3 a.m. in the midst of a panic attack. But there is a commonality in all these possible scenarios because they are all worst case. They are the worst case possible things that could happen to you in any of these circumstances. And naturally, you do not want them or even think about them. You do not accept them. Thus, we can deduce what worry is from the following statement. Worry is a non-acceptance of the worst possible scenario. But what happens if we invert the above statement, face the dragon, rush towards the fire, and simply accept the worst case scenario? And that was a question that the Stoics less than 2,000 years ago contemplated. And their answer was an exercise called premeditatio malorum, or negative visualization in common English. Instead of running away from what could happen, they faced it instead. Instead of hiding it in the basement, they went out to the open with great courage. And as a Stoic, and pretty astonishing too, philosopher Seneca wrote, quote, "What is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness add to the weight of a disaster. This is a reason for ensuring that nothing ever takes us by surprise. We should project our thoughts ahead of us at every turn and have in mind every possible eventuality instead of only the usual course of events." And he later concludes, "Rehearse them in your mind: exile, torture, war, shipwreck. All the terms of our human lot should be before our eyes." End quote. So instead of fearing the worst case scenario, they meditated over it. They reflected on what could possibly happen, not with the intention of indulging in worry, as it might be commonly misunderstood, but to realize that they could handle it. They could be strong in character amidst the potential hardships. So with this realization, they accepted the worst case scenario. knowing that they would be unshaken and better for it had it happened. And this is, by the way, the core of personal anti-fragility, which is a part of the total living, which you will see the link in the description. By accepting and embracing the worst case scenario, the worry, which was previously prevalent, spinning around, lost its grip and disappeared. 4 days ago, as of this recording, I revisited the classic book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. This 70-year-old book contains stories, tons and tons of them, of people facing adversity and how they overcame their worries, from potential torture to handling paralysis. In all of their stories, the solution was acceptance. First, visualize what could possibly happen, and then accept it fully, and then take the possible action steps. So, what does it mean for you, really? The main message is this: accept the worst case scenario, and the worry will be gone instantly. To illustrate it, let's go through each common source of worry and inject some acceptance to it, and then you will quickly discover what will happen when you do it. So let's take the most common one, the fear of public speaking and presentations. And by the way, it's actually more fear than death, fear of public speaking. But when you're comfortable but being shaky, off track and stuttering, you can relax before your presentation. You might even incorporate this random acts of, no, I said this and now I said that into your speech to connect with your audience, because the audience will in turn empathize with you because they fully understand your nervousness and being on the spotlight. So they are on your side there, especially when you make it clear to them that it's all about them and you are still moving forward because you want to have something important to say that could benefit their lives. So being your authentic self, in other words. Let's take a similar example, which is music performance or sport performance or whatever kind of show in that regard. If you can relax and accept that it might turn out to not be as exciting as previously expected, you can totally relax and focus into the flow state by quickly subsiding all these anxious thoughts and go into your moves and whatever can come out from the improvisation, this flow state. You can wow your crowd that way, being in a very stoic and tough-minded individual that can face whatever happens with great honor. The third example is more of a grant application or a pitch. And this one is a little bit different because you do not necessarily want to evoke a crowd, but more to enable deal makers or decision makers or investors in that matter to favor you in their decision and ultimately to raise the funding. But when you're comfortable coming across as nervous before, then you can be more authentic and genuine and evoke sympathy from the others. And even if you're rejected, it's still a valuable experience. And as many of the sources, like for instance Samuel Beckett, call fail again, fail better, it's ultimately the same way. You learn from experience and then go forward, never backward. So let's say that the fourth example, by the way, if you have a deadline and you have lots to do, and it could be even school, academic work, or other kinds of reports needing to be submitted before a certain date, and you're not sure if you'll be able to happen it. But when you're comfortable that you will maybe miss the deadline, but it won't be as dangerous as you previously expected, two things happen. Either one, your relaxation will wither away from procrastination. It will wither away whatever was forcing you to simply not move at all on it, and thus enable fast action. And since you have nothing to lose now, really, because you ultimately enjoy sitting there working, so there is no real loss and no real threat. Or, as it might be in the second case, you might drop the activity altogether. You might realize, okay, maybe that wasn't important after all. Maybe I can simply have higher priorities and eliminate it. Whatever happens will ultimately be the best thing for you when you accept it. Let's take another example, which is health. Common for all of us, of course, when we are alive. But when you're comfortable with a certain physical condition or surrendering to a certain chronic pain, acute pain, injury, or other kind of illness, whether temporary or permanent, then you can start to relax and in almost all cases fuel the hormesis, our innate capacity to heal itself. And even if it's not, it's still much better than all the other options, injecting too much toxins, etc. Alcohol, not good, if you want to stay very healthy. Let's take the sixth example, being having the comfort in financial ruin. If you're comfortable with perceived lack of whatever you have in terms of belongings, you can cut out what's unnecessary without feeling the sting of loss. And even Seneca, the ultra-wealthy person of his time, used to spend days and nights with minimum belongings, either traveling or at home, always asking himself, is this the condition that I feared? And yes, you can survive and even thrive with minimum belonging and pretty much live on existential zero from a material perspective. And also to kind of tie it together with another common worry, which is job, whether you will lose it or not gain it, or maybe it's the wrong job after all, you want to pursue a certain career. If you're comfortable of being in such a quote-unquote miserable, although it's not really miserable, scenario of living very sparse and ultimately don't have anything to show for, then you do not need to depend on your job as much. You can start shaping your career step by step, or getting more respect, which ultimately ties down to the next example, which involves people. We are very social creatures and social belongings, because if we don't belong to the tribe, we are cast out and ultimately dead. That was the reality at the age of civilization. So if you can go beyond the evolutionary programming and accept rejection from other people, because remember, because they are certain people, there are other people too. It's not like the entire world of almost 8 billion people now rejects you all at once. You can have the opportunity to choose your crowd. And if you have the independence and what's called in negotiation walk away position, then you have leverage now. You stop being non-needy and can simply replace after another if you know that, okay, if you want to abandon me, okay, do it. But if you don't, I will totally love it too. So they will respect you more instead, because you're a person with character, person with integrity and honor and honesty. Very valuable traits if you want to ultimately ascend towards whatever kind of status hierarchy there is, whether in military, business, personal, in all of the cases. And speaking of friends and loved ones, etc., I mean, they might have sufficient well-being, but it might not be the case. Maybe one is struggling with a certain illness or accident or injury or even some loss of other kind. If you can, although it might be hard at first, but if you can sort of envision that your life without this loved one and realize that you will not die. You can start productive action instead of being trapped in anxiety. So you can be more of a help to your loved one instead of being stuck in some kind of mental loop and ultimately be of no use to anyone, including yourself. But if you are more inclined towards, okay, whatever happens, I'll take it, but I will do my best that this other person, whether child, sibling, parent, close friend, not so close friend, etc., that they will be ultimate security and surrender, what that means. If you can simply take more productive action, they will ultimately respect you more and be your immense gratitude too. And then the last thing, because you can, so far we talked about everything that you're involved in, but you can worry about stuff that you're not ultimately involved in. Like, for instance, world events such as pandemics, as we had a lot of time with COVID-19, or it could be wars, like, for instance, right now, as of this recording, with Russia and Ukraine, or it could be other reforms or civil unrest and even climate change, something that we are all a part of. All of these are very high concerns, but at some point you need to sort of accept what you cannot directly control. But of course, if you are in the position to directly control it, then you ultimately have the responsibility to do what's best for everyone. But when you accept the world as it is, it won't bother you anymore, because you ultimately do what you can, and thus making real change happen. You simply start from the ground up, getting more support from other people and start a movement that way. This is how every single major reform started. So with all of these examples, we talked about presentations and performances of various kinds, we talked about deadlines, we talked about other people, we talked about health and wealth and ultimately the world. All of these sources of worry, when you simply accept the worst case scenarios that can happen there, I hope it's clear that good things will eventually follow by simply facing what's coming. And continuing to worry is much worse, because it's eventually destroying you and surroundings. And remember that you've gone through hardships before, but you're still alive. And when bad things happen, you're more likely to take action and adapt. And as Seneca once again said, quote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." So if you want your best life and end the suffering, grapple with reality instead. Enter total presence and start helping yourself and the world. So I will conclude with some practical action steps you can do right away. And this is all based on both the Premeditatio Malorum practice and the book by Dale Carnegie, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, Good Anxiety and Feeling Good, etc. I found this step-by-step method to be extremely helpful in quieting my own what-ifs and to be free from whatever was halting me down before in terms of this fog of worry, as we can call it. And it is the following way. 1. Whenever you feel the slightest worry, repeat this phrase: worry is a non-acceptance of the worst case scenario. And usually that's enough to stop the worry, because then you realize, okay, I'm not accepting it, so let's accept it right now and then move on. But if you're not at that proficiency yet, let's call it that way, then you can move over to step 2, which is visualize or write down. Usually it's easier to write down in vivid details what would happen if the worst case scenario was true right now. Like, document it if you were to describe it to another person, like what it looks like, both in colors, sounds, feelings, etc. What would it mean to you realistically? That's what you want to capture in step 2. And then in step 3, think or write, most recommended to write, I'm okay with it, or I'll be better for it, has it happened to me? And if it still sounds quite outrageous, just remember the examples previously mentioned in this video And you can jump back to the timestamps again if you want to simply grab a quick check. Okay, when this happens, what can it mean to me, etc. To give some thorough examples of how you can accept whatever is coming. So that was step 3. Step 4. Now that the worry has lost its grip, write down potential actions you can do to prevent it from happening. And this is ultimately the main message from Premeditatio Malorum, which was negative visualization, and How to Stop Worrying by Dale Carnegie, by having this action plan of first acknowledging the potential fear, then accepting it, and then take action. Acknowledge, accept, action. The 3 A's, we can call it, in other words. So, with this simple truth of that worrying is a non-acceptance of the worst case scenario, and that you accept what's happening instead, you will have the ultimate power to not worry again anymore. And as time again from the Stoics in the ancient time up until now has proven, this method truly works. So whenever you feel caught in this negative spiral, as I talked in the beginning, apply these 3 steps of acknowledge, accept, and action, and you will finally have a worry-free life. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and click subscribe. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter, where I dive deeper on one of the articles I publish every day for that particular week, plus some other good stuff too. See you!